All right. So let's talk about your artwork.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little bit about it.
Well, a lot of my artwork is obviously very queer focused, very queer focused and very anti-fascist focused
Mm-hmm.
in a way that I feel a lot of artwork, especially nowadays, is lacking in.
Okay.
With a lot of the artwork I use, I deliberately utilize a lot of fascist imagery and a lot of the sort of behaviors and mechanisms that you see a lot of alt-right and people use online.
Mm-hmm.
Primarily because that I believe that the best way to combat and show like the distaste of fascism, the hate of it, a lot of the part of the stuff that sucks, stuff that really sucks about it,
Okay.
is not to show them as metaphors or glaze over them or make them a fake other thing like you see in Star Wars with the Imperial whatever. I haven't watched Star Wars. It's a very obvious metaphor for fascism, which worked incredibly well for its time because the era we were in, we had just come out, were kind of out of the Cold War, World War II. Of course, there was still a lot of right wing and Nazi stuff going around in that era as well, but people were sensitive to that. They were.
And
You
you're
had
talking about the period of Star Wars when it came out?
Yeah, because it was well after World War II, but
It was well
yeah,
after World War
right.
II.
But you have to think within the conscience of the people that lived through World War II.
Are watching Star Wars?
No, their children are.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And so those children are hearing about the Holocaust, Auschwitz,
yes,
everything that Nazi Germany did.
I get it.
The generation that grew up past World War II was very close to it, familially. Right. So with Star Wars, it's a pretty obvious anti-fascist, anti-Nazi movie to them because, they were growing up right around society rebuilding from that.
Mm-hmm. I never really thought about it that way.
Yeah,
that's really interesting.
Yeah, no, that's the big thing. It's usually the generation that comes after that's way more sensitive to it. That's more sensitive to it rising up in their own roots. But as you get into the 90s, early 2000s, early 2010s, a lot of that sensitivity and awareness starts to die down.
Mm-hmm.
Because, the children, the next generation isn't as adept. It's not being pushed forward because they aren't seeing, oh, my parents went through this. It's my grandparents and my great-grandparents.
Right.
The effects of the fascist and Nazi regime becomes less of an impact on the future generations. Which is of no fault to the future generations, as that's how it should be. That type of stuff should not be affecting the future generations much, which unfortunately isn't the case now. But you start to see people lose sensitivity to that. They lose their ability to pick up on dog whistles and red flags. A big core theme being a chauvinism, and how that started to become a kind of popular thing in the mid 2000s, early 2010s, from my experience at least, growing up in Georgia.
Okay.
Is this sense of masculinity rising up? I remember being around a lot of people that talked about, we need to bring back gentlemanism. We need to bring back being a man for women. A lot of reinforcements of, and I'm not a fan of using heteronormative culture, but that kind of is what is going on. Is within heteronormative culture, there's a lot of unknowing reinforcement of fascist ideals in the way of chauvinism. The idea that one is better than the other, one must protect another. It creates a well-meaning but in the long-term harmful gap in two different people in society, being, men and women, heteronormativity. It's how women should behave and how men should behave, as opposed to there really is no difference outside of how the mechanisms of society negatively impact women and boost up men within that society. And chauvinism is about reinforcing that in the light of, not dandyism, that's a different concept, but within being a gentleman, that whole thing. It's not bad to be a good person, hold the door open for a woman, but it's the mechanisms of why you think you need to do that. If you are thinking because a man should, you aren't a bad person for thinking that. It's just, no, that the man part doesn't have to be a part of the equation. It can just be, it's a good thing to do. It's a nice thing to do. But because of, 2000s, 2010s, rise in, more outward homophobia, that becoming a divisive topic in the political sphere, more belligerently so.
Interesting.
You start to see a lot of that toxic masculinity rise, and a lot of the heteronormativity show its fascist roots.
Interesting.
And to tie this back to my art, it's that I feel, especially being in a lot of queer spaces, one of the big things people don't like to talk about is how very fascist they are. I hang around a lot of trans women, a lot of trans men, a lot of gender non-conforming people. And the way that one of the big things that's a very divisive thing that I have heard from both trans men and trans women, two of which are like both friends, we're in a group together, is how a lot of trans men breed a lot of trans misogyny towards trans women. And I have the words for it, they just escaped me because it's a difficult topic to discuss, because one of the things with a lot of queer spaces now is they are focused largely online. As opposed to, you didn't have that when you were around queer people. They were at gay clubs, bars.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, they had their spaces publicly.
Right.
However, with the rise of online spaces, it provides a significantly safer space for queer people, in that
Right.
if someone online experiences homophobia, transphobia, they can just log off.
Right.
They can just block you. It is a lot easier to just remove that person from your space.
Right.
But as a new generation grows up only in those queer spaces because of capitalism and, the industrialism, car-centric building, the term escapes me, but
It's okay.
it's how a lot of third-party spaces are being demolished and destroyed. Like the malls are getting less and less people, getting less online shop. Everything is becoming focused online.
That's a good point.
So now you have a bunch of queer children, queer teens, queer young adults that don't really have a space to go to publicly.
Right.
Before online, it was, I can come home from a place where I have to mask my queer identity.
Right.
And online, I can just be myself unabashedly.
Right.
And now it's, I don't have anywhere to go but online.
Right.
I only have these spaces online.
Right.
And in a red state like Kentucky, in New York, you can still pretty easily go and find a queer club, queer space, queer whatever. In Kentucky, it's a little more difficult. And if you look at a lot of studies, especially in Florida, red states house the most queer people. Most queer people, most minorities. And in those red states, it is obviously insanely difficult and dangerous to find public, open, physical queer spaces.
Correct.
And so how this ties back into the art, again, I promise this.
No, it's fine.
These are all very core concepts to understand in the mechanisms of the online queer space, and how we are being huddled into, for example, Twitter, now known as X, ran by Elon Musk, very obvious belligerent racist transphobe.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, he has gone to talk about how
I didn't know
his
that.
child was robbed from him by the woke mob. And they're just trans. That's it.
Wow.
Yeah, he's been tailoring the algorithm towards right-wing for ages. And you can't scroll on your feed without coming across some dude being belligerently racist.
Wow.
The term cis... Hi, puppy. Come here.
Somebody wants attention.
You
Can you sit down, please?
Sit down.
Can you sit down, please? Okay, thank you.
The term, for example, the term cis, which is just a term to describe people that identify fully with their gender assigned at birth, with like no alterations, changes, whatever. They will. That's just the term, cisgender, transgender, cisgender. Cis is a blocked term there. But a slew of other slurs towards minorities and queer people aren't, which obviously goes to show the narrative they're pulling there. And Twitter is a very very big space for queer people, especially queer artists, people that engage with queer art. And that space being turned into a right-wing shithole, quite frankly, is devastating to the culture there.
Yeah.
And on top of that, the algorithm of Twitter has long been organized towards drama and infighting. It's designed to get you angry and designed to get you to stay on there. Negativity is boosted by the algorithm.
Yeah.
And so when you have a bunch of queer people who aren't getting out, don't have a safe space physically, and now they're on a site with a bunch of right-wingers, people that want them dead talk about wanting them dead.
That's terrible.
And the algorithm is fueling only negative interaction. You get a lot of queer infighting.
Right.
You get a lot of kids that aren't learning queer history, aren't engaging with older queer people. They aren't getting to know each other. They aren't getting real-world interaction experience that is important for being queer. And so you start to see a lot of really weird exclusivity stuff. Like trans meds, TERFs. Trans meds being the idea that you can only be transgender if you medically transition, if you do hormones. Which isn't true. If I go by he, they, I'm transgender. It's a divisive topic among online queer people. But if you talk to an older queer person, they'll be like, yeah. And I know this because I've talked with them. I work with them.
Right.
I go to work with these people. And they say, yeah, no, you go by he, they, transgender. You change your gender.
Right.
But in exclusive queer spaces, you have children as young as 13, 14, 15 talking about how that it isn't, or... And it really just boils down to uneducated children, which is fine.
Right. Right.
Children are going to be uneducated. They have to learn. They do learn. You grow out of that. That's part of being a child. But now you have queer adults who aren't getting out. Queer adults who are central focused online in those spaces with those kids.
Right.
And a lot of those adults don't know how to engage with those children. And so you have adults attacking children, children attacking adults, nobody knowing if they're really an adult or really a child. Or sometimes even knowing they're a child and attacking them anyway and holding them to that same standard.
Right.
It's very insane behavior that can really only be bred online because these queer spaces are being demolished physically.
Correct. Yeah.
And how this ties back to the art.
Right.
Sorry, that was a long tangent.
No. It was good, though. It was very good.
Right. And because now we have queer infighting, we have definitions of how you should be this, how you should be that. For example, the trans med of you need to medically transition in order to be transgender.
Okay.
That's a key of fascism, is you have to be this to do this and this. It's the exclusivity. Fascism is not an ideology, it is not a philosophy.
Okay.
It is and then no matter how hard anybody tries to argue it isn't. It is not rooted in anything. It is simply something birthed from an insecurity of a lack of knowledge or an insecurity of a lack of understanding. It is birthed purely from fear and ignorance.
That's correct.
And for example, trans men, it's to put it in a different perspective to tie it closer to old fascism. The type of fascism I'm talking about is neo-fascism.
Okay.
Is what I call it personally within my friend group. Is, modern veiled of being accurate, of thinking of somebody else, which isn't a bad thing. But it becomes bad when that person you're thinking of doesn't exist. Like, telling someone I'm transgender because I go by he, they, and they say, well, you shouldn't do that because real trans people have to do HRT and you're not really doing that. It's like a, whoa, buddy, this is for me. Me going by who I am isn't affecting anything.
And we have the conversation of the dog in Hold up. It's okay.
You need it. Alright, back.
Alright, we're back.
Sorry for the interruption.
It's alright.
It's the idea that, well, for fascism, you know how, like, you remember this, queer people just couldn't be queer because of the children, or thinking the children, or it's gross, or can you just do it in your own home? That's a big one. That's a big one.
Yeah.
Same thing here of, you know, you being yourself makes me uncomfortable.
Right.
And it's that, and in the yogic philosophy, it's that empathy, right? It's that sense of reality where one, I have my reality, you have yours. That is in the same vein of a conservative telling me not to be queer and just do it in my own home. Don't make it a part of my personality. In the same vein as them trying to exert their control, their comfort over my own sense of self.
Right.
Is trying to suppress my identity, that of which does not affect anybody around me.
Okay.
In the same vein, me calling myself he, they, and them saying, no, that makes me uncomfortable, it's the same deal.
Okay.
Same thing, new coat of paint. Would you say it's applicable?
I think so.
Alright.
I agree.
It's always important to just make sure that,
Yeah.
you know, it's understood. And the thing with neo-fascism and a lot of fascism in general like this, in the queer spaces, is nobody wants to be a fascist. Nobody wants to be a Nazi. Nobody wants to do that at all, whatsoever.
Well, at least not out loud.
Well, not out loud for a good portion of people, but not at all for a whole lot more people.
Okay.
But when you tell them that's fascist behavior, they lock up, get defensive.
Right, of course.
Because, you know, again, reasonably,
right.
Nobody wants to be a Nazi. Nobody wants to really be a fascist.
Right.
But that is something that, again, is a very important thing, too, that people need to be aware of, is how much fascism is deeply rooted into society, and how a lot of the comforts we have are a result of it.
Right.
A lot of Americans live in excess comfort.
Correct.
They don't realize how much that excess is until it's reduced, and then they lose their mind.
Right.
And then they lose their mind for a little bit and realize, you know, I don't really need all that.
Right.
And so now, again, back to the art.
Okay.
Again, this is all building blocks.
Sure.
Because of that comfort, because of this huddling, this closure, a lot of it's starting to get the idea that it's being glossed over, numbed. A lot of these things are numbed over time. With my art, I feel that the way in which we are portraying Nazis and fascists in media and art as a whole is becoming too detached from reality and how they behave in reality. So for me, using how they portray themselves in my work and letting the, in my opinion, patheticness of how they portray themselves speak for themselves for the queer viewer, queer interpreter of my art, is all you really need. You need to be upfront with it. You don't need to have the metaphors, the little isms, the little references. Like having a character of pure hate whittling someone down over and over again until that's all that's left in their art, and having them realize that hate is what is the cause of, like, the destruction of a kingdom or whatever. That's a metaphor for fascism, because fascism is rooted in hate, it's rooted in ignorance, rooted in fear.
Right.
That worked earlier because everybody was sensitive to that. Everyone was pretty aware of the dog whistles. You had people beating up Nazis in public.
Right.
Now, that doesn't really work because we understand that as metaphors.
He wants to go to the window.
No. Sit, Rocky. Now, because we have all these metaphors floating about of fascism, like Dune is a severely anti-fascist movie. Like, it's so blatant.
Yeah, I think it's written that way, though.
Right. But then you go online, you go in public, and people don't see it that way.
I know, it's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. People are no longer attuned to the mechanisms of fascism. When they think fascism, they just think...
That's interesting that you see it that way. Do you think that, not to get political, but do you think that's the reason why the election went the way it did?
It's because median voters are really stupid. Genuinely. That's... I mean, that is
part of it is what you're saying is that they're desensitized.
Yeah.
They really don't know.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. A lot of them aren't aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
The best
that's
way
interesting. I think you make a very, very strong and valid point there that even I wasn't aware of it. I mean, I understand what you're saying, and I understand the what do you call the terminology,
right?
But I wasn't even aware.
Right,
that was.
But now that it's been put in a different
right
way,
now that you bring it up, I'm like, yeah, I kind of do see that. Wow, that's a very good point that you make.
Right.
So, where do you see your art? How are you displaying your art for people to see this?
I've been working on posting it online, getting the courage to kind of get it out there more visibly.
Where online? For people
just
to see it.
Different social media spaces.
Oh, okay. Are there any spaces that we can see it in?
Not yet. I'm still working on that.
Okay.
Well, I mean, they're up. I just want, but my primary source of doing it is through creating games.
Okay.
Because that is because I like making games.
Right.
But it's also a very, I feel, powerful medium to get even the people that don't really engage with art critically.
Sure.
To get them to engage with something like that.
Sure. It's like the person that wrote Doom is a great media to present an idea of something that was currently happening.
Right. Dune started off as books.
Right.
And because books were like a big thing everybody was reading.
Right.
And because now everyone's playing video games.
Right.
And a lot of people that don't think critically about art do that.
Yeah.
I feel that my method of, brute force showing Nazis and fascism in a bad light, or not in a bad light. I mean, obviously it's bad, but in a light of, no, this is just how they present themselves. This is how they talk. This is how they think. They just don't tell you that.
Mm-hmm.
Doing it in that manner to people that aren't used to thinking super critically, it's good because you can't deny the themes. When you see the Colossus of Nero, a tyrant, with hands stretched out, pinned to a Baptist cross, with a sonoran spinning behind it, his arm resting on the depiction of Atlas from Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, holding the spear that crucified Jesus Christ.
Right.
It becomes, you can't really deny this is how fascists view themselves, and these are the mechanisms.
I love the imagery. I think I saw that one. You sent that to me. Have you ever thought about maybe like having a gallery showing of the artwork?
Maybe if that ever comes to fruition.
You have to make that happen.
I'm sure I will in time.
That would make a great gallery showing. I think it's a powerful statement. And I don't mean to interrupt you.
No, you're fine.
It's a powerful statement that you're making. It made me aware of something that I wasn't aware. You made a very, very powerful statement. I'm excited about it. And as a gallery showing, it would really open up people's eyes in a different way of seeing the artwork, but not just the artwork, but how you interpret it, of what you're doing and how you see it. That's really, it's really incredible. And that is really how an artist presents his work.
Right.
Just the thought.
Well, that's what I'm kind of doing on social media, is I'm posting the images using hashtags now.
Mm-hmm.
Because originally I was too scared to do it. I was like, but now that I've been doing it, more people Obviously, there are people that think it's distasteful or whatever because,
Sure.
you know, they don't like seeing that stuff up front, which
Mm-hmm.
I get, but also, you know, this is happening. These are
Right.
you can't dance around these topics
Right.
anymore.
No, you can't.
I have trans friends. I have other queer friends
I love it.
that are. I have someone that I know that's in a very like Alabama red state,
Mm.
and because of the Trump thing, they're worried they won't be able to get HRT anymore. It'll be increasingly difficult.
Wow.
And so that's
Did they get it in Mexico?
well, that's the thing. They're poor. They support their family. They live with their
I
family.
see. Yeah.
They're very, and I feel for them. I feel heavily for them. I worry too because the labor unions. I rely on my union at UPS. That's done a lot for me.
Mm-hmm.
And with this election, they're going to be attacking labor unions.
Mm.
So my insurance could be in a gamble, could be up for grabs.
Mm.
So this also impacts me, seeing this blatant ignorance to how comfortable fascists have become being publicly the Nazis affects me, and I'm tired of watching the average person be uncomfortable when things get too political or too woke.
Yeah.
Like, I've had enough. I'm gonna make my art as belligerently in your face as possible. We're having dudes with schizophrenia shooting the tupa of Hitler going on. That's one of the things I got going.
Good.
Like
That's awesome. Yeah. I love it. I love what you're doing. I think it's really great. I'm very supportive of what you're doing. Very supportive. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you for giving me this time with you. I appreciate it. And I totally love what you're doing. Please keep going and let me know if I can help in any way. I love you.
No, me too.
Let's see.